The Napa Valley autumn air carried the scent of ripening grapes and old money. James Kensington's Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished hardwood floor of the Silverado Country Club's auction hall, each step measured and deliberate. At 38, he'd perfected the art of appearing interested while remaining completely detached. It was a skill that had served him well in Silicon Valley boardrooms, and even better in his personal life. The charity auction was exactly what he'd expected. Wealthy vintners and tech moguls bidding on wine collections, exotic vacations, and art pieces they'd never hang. James had come because his PR team insisted. "You need to be more visible in philanthropic circles," they'd said. "Soften your image." He didn't need to soften anything. Kensington Technologies had just closed a $2.3 billion acquisition. His image was fine. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice cut through the murmur of conversation, "we have something a bit unusual for tonight's proceedings. Lot 73, a retired military working dog in need of specialized care and a committed home." The room grew quieter, though not with interest, with uncertainty. A handler led the dog onto the small stage. The animal moved with a pronounced limp, favoring 3 legs. His coat, German Shepherd clearly, was dull and patchy in places. But it was the eyes that made James's champagne glass pause halfway to his lips. Dark, intelligent eyes that had seen things, eyes that recognized danger, loss, betrayal, eyes that expected nothing and hoped for less. James knew those eyes. He saw them in the mirror every morning. "This is Sergeant," the auctioneer continued, his usual enthusiasm dampened. 8 years old, served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Marine Corps, lost his right front leg in an IED explosion that took his handler's life. He's been in rehabilitation for 18 months, but the auctioneer cleared his throat. "He's proven difficult to place, severe PTSD, night terrors, aggression towards strangers. The VA program has exhausted its placement options." In that moment, something shifted within James, something he hadn't felt in years, the stirring of something human beneath his cold, guarded exterior. But was this the start of his redemption? Or was he walking into a deeper kind of emotional chaos? Around him, people shifted uncomfortably. A few whispered to their companions. This wasn't what they'd come for. Not the broken, the damaged, the inconvenient. "Starting bid, $100, the auctioneer said, his tone almost apologetic. Silence. James watched as the sergeant stood on that stage, rigid with tension, waiting. The dog's remaining front leg trembled slightly. Not from physical weakness, James realized, but from the effort of holding himself together in a room full of strangers. From the struggle to appear calm when every instinct probably screamed danger. $50? The auctioneer tried. More silence. A woman near the front shook her head when her husband leaned in to whisper something. "Folks, I should mention that without placement tonight, Sergeant will be transferred to a long-term care facility. It's not ideal for a dog of his." Particular needs. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. What happened to the violent, traumatized dogs who couldn't be placed? The polite fiction of long-term care. James's hand rose before his brain engaged. $10,000. The room went silent. Every head turned. James kept his eyes on the dog, who had lifted his head at the sound of James's voice. Their gazes locked across the auction hall. Two beings who'd built walls so high they'd forgotten what it felt like to let anyone in. "Sir, did you say?" the auctioneer stammered. $10,000, James repeated, his voice carrying the same cold authority that had closed billion-dollar deals. "And I want the contact information for whatever therapist or specialist has been working with him. I'll cover their fees for continued care." The room erupted in whispers. James ignored them. The handler was staring at him with barely concealed shock, and the auctioneer was scrambling to formalize the unprecedented bid. But James only watched Sargent. The dog's ears had perked forward slightly. The trembling in his leg had stopped. Those knowing eyes studied James with what looked like cautious recognition. One survivor seeing another. What neither James nor Sargent knew was that this single impulsive decision would unravel everything James had built to protect himself. This was just the beginning of a journey that would change them both forever. But would it be too late for both of them? What drives someone who has everything to risk it all for a broken soul? Stay with us to find out. James had made countless acquisitions in his career. Companies, properties, assets. He knew how to assess value, negotiate terms, and execute cleanly. But as he stood in the Silverado parking lot with a traumatized war dog sitting stiffly in a reinforced crate in his Range Rover, he realized he had absolutely no idea what he'd just done. The handler, a young Marine veteran named Rodriguez, had spent 20 minutes briefing him with increasing concern. "Sir, I need to be real with you. Sargent isn't a pet. He's not going to curl up by your fireplace and be grateful. He's got serious trauma. He's bitten 3 potential adopters. He has panic attacks that last for hours. Loud noises send him into defense mode. He doesn't trust anyone." "I understand," James had said, though he didn't. "Not really." "With respect, sir, I don't think you do." Rodriguez had looked at him with the special brand of patience reserved for wealthy people making terrible decisions. "The VA's best behaviorist has been working with him for a year and a half. Dr. Claire Thompson. She's the only person Sargent has shown any positive response to. I'll give you her number, but what? But she's going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you. Sargent needs someone who understands trauma, someone patient, someone who won't give up when it gets hard. And it will get hard, sir." James had seen countless dogs in shelters during his carefully curated charity photo ops over the years. But there was something about this one, a broken animal whose pain mirrored his own, that made him bid on it without thinking. Little did he know. This was just the beginning of a journey that would change them both forever. Now, driving through Napa's dark country roads toward his estate, James glanced in the rearview mirror. Sargent sat motionless in the crate, staring at nothing. The dog hadn't made a sound since being loaded into the vehicle. James's estate was actually a 12,000-square-foot modernist compound he'd bought 2 years ago and visited perhaps 6 times. It had been featured in Architectural Digest. All clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a wine cellar that the previous owner had spent a lifetime curating. James had bought it because his financial advisor suggested diversifying into real estate. He kept it because selling felt like admitting he'd made a mistake. He pulled into the circular driveway and sat for a moment, engine idling. What the hell was he supposed to do now? The handler had given him supplies, food, medications, a special bed, toys that Sargent had never shown interest in, and a thick folder of behavioral notes that James hadn't yet opened. "One step at a time," he muttered to himself, then immediately felt ridiculous for talking to no one. He opened the crate in the garage, giving Sargent space to exit on his own terms. The dog didn't move for a long moment, then carefully limped out, nose working overtime to assess this new environment. His entire body was tense, coiled. James stayed still, letting the sergeant investigate. The dog moved in a wide arc around him, never taking his eyes off James for more than a second. When Sargent reached the door leading into the house, he stopped and sat, waiting. "Smart," James said quietly. "You want to clear each room before committing?" He opened the door slowly. Sargent's ears flattened briefly at the sound, then relaxed when nothing else happened. The dog entered the house with military precision, checking corners, marking exits, assessing threats. It would have been impressive if it weren't so heartbreaking. James's phone buzzed. Marcus, his assistant, with the 15th text of the evening. "Sir, I have Dr. Thompson's number whenever you're ready." James looked at Sargent, who had completed his security sweep and now stood in the center of the vast living room, looking small and lost despite his size. "Yeah," James said to the empty room. "I'm ready." He dialed. It rang 4 times before a woman answered, her voice sharp with fatigue. "Dr. Thompson, this is James Kensington. I was given your number by—" "I know who you are, Mr. Kensington." Her tone was decidedly unimpressed. "Rodriguez called me an hour ago. $10,000 for a dog you're completely unprepared to handle. That's either extremely generous or extremely stupid." James felt his jaw tighten. I don't appreciate wealthy people treating damaged animals like impulse purchases," she cut him off. "Sargent isn't a status symbol or a tax write-off. He's a combat veteran with severe PTSD who needs specialized care. What exactly is your plan here?" "My plan," James said coldly, "is to hire you to provide that specialized care." Silence on the other end. Then, "Excuse me? Rodriguez said you're the best. That sergeant responds to you, so I'm hiring you. Whatever your rate is, I'll triple it. I'll cover all expenses. You help Sargent, and you teach me how to help him." More silence. James could hear her breathing, could almost feel her recalculating her assumptions about him. "Mr. Kensington, I'm a veterinary behaviorist with the VA program. I don't do private consultations." "Everyone has a price, Dr. Thompson. Not everything is for sale." Her voice had gone ice cold. "And that kind of attitude is exactly why I'm concerned about Sargent being with you." As he looked at the dog, standing lost in his oversized living room, something stirred deep inside James, a long-forgotten feeling that he'd buried with his wealth, his career, and his emotional armor. It was the sense of loss, the same sense of brokenness that had followed him for years, chasing him through his mansion's empty hallways. "You're right," James said quietly, the admission surprising even himself. "I'm not prepared for this. I saw him on that stage tonight, and I acted on impulse, but I did it, and now he's here, and I'm not sending him back. So you can think I'm an arrogant idiot, and maybe I am. But if you care about Sargent, you'll help him anyway." The silence stretched longer this time. "I'll be there in an hour," Dr. Thompson finally said. "Text me the address. And Mr. Kensington, have coffee ready. It's going to be a long night." She hung up before he could respond. James looked at Sargent, who had lain down but kept his head up, eyes tracking every movement. "Well," James said, "I think she hates me." Sargent's ear twitched. It wasn't much, but it was something. When 2 broken souls collide, who saves whom? The answer might surprise you. Claire Thompson arrived exactly 63 minutes after hanging up. James watched through the window as she parked a beat-up Honda Civic next to his Range Rover, the contrast almost comical. She emerged wearing jeans, hiking boots, and a faded Marines sweatshirt, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She carried a large veterinary bag and moved with purpose. She was nothing like the polished women in his usual circle. No designer labels, no calculated elegance, just competence and barely concealed irritation. James opened the door before she could knock. "Dr. Thompson." "Mr. Kensington." She brushed past him without ceremony. "Where's Sargent?" "Living room. He hasn't moved in." But she was already walking away, following some instinct that led her directly to where Sargent lay. When the dog saw her, his entire demeanor changed. His tail moved, just once, but definitely. His ears perked forward. He made a sound low in his throat that wasn't quite a whine. "Hey, warrior," Claire said softly, kneeling 6 feet away from him. She didn't approach, didn't reach out. Just settled onto the floor and waited. James watched from the doorway as Sergeant Army crawled toward her, one slow inch at a time. It took 3 minutes for the dog to close the distance and press his head against her knee. Claire's hand moved to his neck, scratching gently. "I know," she murmured. "New place, scary, but you're safe. I promise." Something in James's chest twisted painfully. When was the last time someone had promised him he was safe? When had he ever been? Claire looked up at him then, and for the first time, he saw past her professional armor. She had amber-colored eyes that were too intelligent, too perceptive. Eyes that looked at him and saw things he didn't want seen. "Sit down," she said. Not an invitation, a command. "On the floor, about where you are now." James hesitated. He was wearing a $3,000 suit. "Sit," Claire repeated, "or leave. Sergeant needs to see you non-threatening, and you're looming." James sat, the Italian wool of his suit pants pressed against the cold hardwood floor. "Now stay still," Claire instructed. "Don't stare at him directly. Don't reach out. Just exist." They sat in silence. Sergeant watched him with wary eyes, still pressed against Claire's side. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. James felt his back beginning to protest the position. "This is what patience looks like, Mr. Kensington," Claire said quietly. "Not throwing money at a problem, not demanding immediate results, just being present until trust decides to show up, if it shows up at all." "I know how to be patient," James said stiffly. "Do you?" Claire's eyes met his. "Or do you know how to wait strategically for things you want to acquire?" The question hit harder than it should have. James found himself without an easy answer. "Tell me about him," James said instead. "Beyond what was in Rodriguez's notes." Claire was quiet for a moment, still stroking Sergeant's neck. Sergeant deployed twice to Afghanistan. His handler was Corporal Michael Chen. They were partners for 4 years. By all accounts, they were inseparable. Chen talked about Sergeant constantly, sent pictures home to his family, planned to adopt him officially after retirement. She paused, her hand stilling on Sergeant's fur. They were on a routine patrol in Helmand Province when an IED detonated. Chen was killed instantly. Sergeant lost his leg but survived. He spent 3 months in a military veterinary hospital in Germany, then another 6 months stateside. He was medically retired from service. James watched Sergeant's eyes, distant, haunted. The Corps tried to place him with Chen's family, but Claire's voice went quiet. Chen's widow couldn't handle it. Every time she looked at Sergeant, she saw her husband dying. Sergeant's behavior issues started after that rejection. Night terrors, aggression, and severe separation anxiety. He went through 4 foster situations in 6 months. Each one ended badly. "And then you," James said. Claire looked at him, something complicated in her expression. "I specialize in combat trauma, both in humans and in military working dogs. I saw too many warriors, both 2-legged and 4-legged, get abandoned after service because dealing with their trauma was inconvenient." Their eyes locked for a brief moment as Claire carefully examined Sergeant's healing amputation site. For the first time, James saw her not as a professional, but as a woman who was fighting for something. Just as he was. Something flickered between them, but neither spoke of it. "Why do you have a Marine sweatshirt?" James asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Claire's hand stilled. "My brother was a Marine, Iraq 2007. He came home, but not really. PTSD, depression. The VA tried, but..." She went back to examining the sergeant. "He killed himself 2 years after coming home. I was in veterinary school at the time. Changed my focus to behavioral trauma the next semester." The rawness of her honesty left James momentarily speechless. "I'm sorry," he managed finally. "Everyone's sorry," Claire said, her voice steady but brittle. "Sorry doesn't help. Action helps. Showing up helps. Not giving up when it's hard helps." She stood, and Sargent immediately tensed. "I need to check him thoroughly. Can you bring my bag over? Slowly." James retrieved the veterinary bag and placed it beside her. As Claire worked, she explained everything she was doing, checking Sargent's vitals, examining his amputation site, assessing his physical condition overall. "He's underweight," she said. "Stress suppresses appetite. His coat is dull from nutritional deficiency. The amputation site has some scar tissue that's probably uncomfortable. I'll prescribe some supplements and a better food regimen." "Whatever he needs," James said. Claire looked at him again, that assessing gaze that made him feel exposed. "What you need to understand, Mr. Kensington, is that Sargent's trauma isn't something you can throw money at. It's not a problem with a price tag solution. It's going to require time, consistency, and emotional availability. 3 things I'd bet you're not particularly good at." "You don't know anything about me," James said defensively. "Don't I?" Claire packed up her equipment. 38-year-old tech CEO. Never married. No long-term relationships on record. I Googled you while driving over. Live alone in a house you barely use. Make impulsive charitable gestures that look good in press releases, but require no actual personal investment. Every word was a scalpel cut, precise and painful. You bid $10,000 on a dog because it made you feel something, Claire continued relentlessly. That's not wrong, but feeling something for 5 minutes at an auction isn't the same as showing up every single day when that dog has a panic attack at 3 a.m., when he snaps at you because you moved too fast, when he looks at you with those eyes and you realize nothing you do will ever completely heal what was broken. Then why are you here? James demanded. If you think I'm going to fail, why help? Claire stood, facing him fully. Because Sargent deserves someone to fight for him, and if that someone is you, then I'm here to make sure you don't screw it up. But make no mistake, Mr. Kensington, I'm not here for you. I'm here for him. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. James followed, frustration and something else, shame maybe, churning in his gut. At the threshold, Claire turned back. I'll be here tomorrow evening at 7. Have his medication log ready and write down every behavior you observe, everything. If he eats, note it. If he doesn't, note it. If he moves from one room to another, note it. I need data. Fine. And Mr. Kensington? Claire's amber eyes locked on his. Don't take anything personally. When Sargent flinches away from you, when he refuses food, when he won't come when called, it's not about you. He's not rejecting you. He's protecting himself the only way he knows how. She left without waiting for a response. James stood in the doorway, watching her taillights disappear down his long driveway. Behind him, he could hear Sargent's labored breathing. The dog was having a panic attack now that Claire was gone. James turned and looked at the traumatized war dog in his living room. Sargent was pacing in tight circles, the way Rodriguez had warned him would happen when stressed. Okay, James said quietly. One step at a time. He sat back down on the floor and pulled out his phone, opened a new note, started documenting. 8:47 p.m. Sargent pacing, breathing elevated, tail tucked, avoids eye contact. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Sometimes healing begins not with solutions, but with witnessing. Will James learn to see what Sargent needs before it's too late? The first night was hell. Around 2 a.m., Sargent's night terrors began. The dog was in the bedroom James had designated for him. Rodriguez had stressed the importance of a safe space when the sounds started. Whimpers that escalated into full-throated howls. Then barking. Aggressive, terrified barking that echoed through the empty house. James rushed to the room, found Sargent backed into a corner, snarling at shadows. The dog's eyes were unfocused, still trapped in whatever nightmare held him. "Sergeant," James tried. But the dog didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear him. James did the only thing he could think of. He called Claire. She answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. "What's wrong?" I don't know, he's freaking out. Barking, growling, he doesn't see me." "Night terror," Claire said, suddenly alert. "Don't approach him. Don't touch him." "He could bite without meaning to." "Then what do I do?" "Talk to him. Low, steady voice. Not commands, just presence. Don't expect him to respond. He won't. Just let him know someone's there." James sat down just outside the doorway and started talking. He had no idea what he was saying. Something about his day, about the house, about nothing. His voice felt stupid in his own ears, but he kept going. 20 minutes later, Sargent's barking subsided to whimpers, then to labored breathing. The dog's eyes gradually focused, seeing the present instead of whatever horror had gripped him. "Good," Claire's voice came through the phone. James had forgotten he was still connected. "Now back away slowly. Let him come to you if he wants. Don't force it." James backed into the hallway. Sargent watched him warily, then lay down, exhausted. "Will it be like this every night?" James asked quietly into the phone. "For a while, probably. Maybe forever. Trauma doesn't run on a schedule." "Claire?" James wasn't sure what he wanted to say. "I know. I'll be there tomorrow night. 7 o'clock. Don't forget his behavioral log." She hung up. James slept on the hallway floor outside the sergeant's room for the rest of the night, just in case. The pattern repeated over the next week. Sargent barely ate, avoided eye contact, flinched at sudden movements, had night terrors almost every night. James documented everything, writing observations in a journal that was quickly filling up. Day 3, Sargent drank water but refused food. Paced for 45 minutes starting at 3 p.m., triggered by the delivery truck sound. Day 4, accepted 3 pieces of kibble from my hand. Immediately retreated. Night terror at 1:47 a.m. lasted 38 minutes. Day 5, followed me from the living room to the kitchen, maintained 10-foot distance. Small victory? Claire came every evening, exactly at 7. She'd examine Sargent, adjust medications, and provide guidance. And she'd watch James with that assessing gaze that made him feel perpetually inadequate. On day 6, she stayed for dinner. It wasn't planned. James had ordered Thai food. He'd been living on takeout since Sargent arrived, and there was too much. Claire was updating Sargent's treatment plan when the delivery arrived. "Have you eaten?" James asked. Claire looked up, surprised. "Not since lunch." "There's plenty, if you want." She hesitated, clearly weighing whether accepting would somehow compromise her professional distance. "Okay. Thanks." They ate in the kitchen, Sargent lying nearby where he could watch both of them. The silence was initially awkward, but James found himself curious. "How did you end up in veterinary behavioral therapy?" he asked. Claire swirled pad thai around her fork. "After my brother died, I was angry. At the world, at the VA, at the military, and at everyone who sent him to war and then forgot about him. I wanted to fix something that felt unfixable." "Did you?" "No." She met his eyes. "You can't fix trauma. You can only help people learn to live with it. That's what I learned after years of training. Trauma doesn't disappear. It becomes part of you. The work is learning how to carry it without letting it destroy you." It wasn't just the dog who was healing. Slowly, as he cared for the animal, James realized something. His own heart, which he'd thought to be beyond repair, was beginning to mend, piece by fragile piece. "Is that what you think will happen with Sargent?" James asked quietly. "He'll learn to carry it?" I think Sargent is already carrying it, Claire said. The question is whether he'll ever trust someone enough to share the weight. She looked at James then, really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. A softening, barely perceptible. You've surprised me, she admitted. How? You're still here. Most wealthy people I've encountered want instant results. When the work gets hard, they delegate. But you're showing up. That matters more than you probably realize. The compliment caught James off guard. He realized he'd been bracing for her criticism so consistently that approval felt foreign. I'm not doing it for recognition, James said. I know. Claire's amber eyes held his. That's why it matters. Something hung in the air between them. A recognition, a connection neither was ready to name. Claire broke eye contact first, standing to clear her plate. I should go. Early surgery tomorrow. Claire. James stopped her at the door. Thank you for everything. She studied his face for a long moment. You're doing the hard part, James. I'm just guiding. It was the first time she'd called him by his first name. After she left, James found Sargent had moved closer to where they'd been sitting. Not much, maybe 2 feet. But closer than he'd been before. Progress. Can 2 damaged souls learn to trust again? Sometimes the smallest steps forward carry the greatest weight. 2 weeks in, something shifted. James woke at 6 a.m. to find Sargent standing in the doorway of his bedroom. The dog had never ventured upstairs before. He stood perfectly still, watching James with those intelligent, wary eyes. Hey, James said softly, not moving. What's up, buddy? Sargent didn't approach, but he didn't retreat either. After a moment, he turned and limped back down the stairs. James heard him settle in his usual spot in the living room. It was the first time Sargent had sought him out. James added it to the log before texting Claire. He came upstairs. First time, her response came immediately. Progress. Don't push. Let him set the pace. That evening, Claire arrived early. She had news. The VA wanted an update on Sargent's placement. There were questions about whether James's unconventional adoption was appropriate. They're being bureaucratic, Claire said, angry. Some people think a civilian taking in a military dog sets a bad precedent. They want Sargent back in the program. No. James's response was immediate and non-negotiable. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. James stood, pacing. Sargent is staying here. Period. James, we might not have a choice. The military technically still owns him. The adoption wasn't finalized through proper channels. James felt something cold settle in his chest. Then we'll make it official. I'll hire lawyers. I'll go to Washington if I have to. Claire watched him with something between surprise and approval. Why? Why does this matter so much to you? James looked at Sargent, who was watching their interaction with alert concern. The dog could sense the tension. Because he's already been abandoned twice, James said quietly. By the Corps when they couldn't place him, by Chen's family when his grief was inconvenient. I'm not going to be the third person who gives up on him. The words hung in the air. Claire's expression softened completely. Okay, she said. Then we fight. Over the next week, James did something he hadn't done in years. He got personally involved. Not just financially, but emotionally. He called senators, contacted military advocacy groups, and reached out to his extensive network. He made Sargent's case to anyone who would listen. And Claire was there through all of it, helping strategize, providing documentation of Sargent's progress, and arguing the case from a medical perspective. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side, late into the evenings, building their case. Coffee turned into dinners. Professional discussions turned into personal conversations. Why don't you have anyone? Claire asked one night over Chinese takeout. They were sitting on the floor in James's living room, legal documents spread around them, Sergeant dozing nearby. Anyone? Partner? Relationship? You're successful, intelligent, not horrible looking. She said it matter-of-factly. Why alone? James was quiet for a long time. Because being alone is safer, he finally said. No one to disappoint, no one to lose. That's not living, that's existing. Says the woman who also lives alone and throws herself into work, James countered. Claire smiled slightly. Fair point. Maybe we're both cowards. Or maybe we've both been hurt enough to know better. And yet here we are, Claire said softly, fighting for a dog who's been hurt worse than both of us combined. What does that say? James met her eyes. That maybe we're healing too? The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Claire reached over and took his hand. It was the first time they'd touched beyond professional necessity. James, a sound from Sergeant made them both turn. The dog had raised his head, watching them. And then, slowly, deliberately, Sergeant stood and walked over to them. He settled down between them, his body touching both of theirs. Claire's eyes widened. He's never done that before. Never voluntarily positioned himself between two people. That's trust. Complete trust. James reached out carefully and rested his hand on the sergeant's back. The dog didn't flinch, didn't move away, just leaned slightly into the touch. Something broke open in James's chest, a dam he'd built brick by brick over decades. Tears he didn't know he was capable of began falling silently down his face. I've got you, James whispered to Sergeant. I've got you, warrior. You're home. Claire's hand was still in his. She squeezed gently, and when James looked at her, he saw tears in her eyes, too. We've got him, she said. Both of us. When walls finally fall, freedom can be terrifying. But what comes after might be worth the fear. The call came on a Tuesday morning. James was working from home. He'd been doing that more often, not wanting to leave Sergeant for long periods, when Marcus called with urgency in his voice. Sir, we have a problem. The problem was that Vertex Corp., James's biggest competitor, had orchestrated a hostile takeover attempt, leveraging James's reduced availability as evidence of compromised leadership. Board members were concerned. Shareholders were nervous. The company James had spent 15 years building was under attack. I need you in the office, Marcus said. Today. We need to strategize, call emergency board meetings, rally support. I'll be there in an hour. But as James hung up and looked at Sergeant, who was having one of his good days, actually playing with a rope toy, he felt something he'd never experienced before. Genuine conflict about choosing work over something personal. He called Claire. She answered with her usual efficiency. What's wrong? How do you know something's wrong? Because you never call during work hours. What happened? James explained the situation. Claire was quiet for a moment. You need to go, she said finally. It's your company. But, Sergeant, I'll come stay with him. I can work from your place today. He'll be fine. Claire, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. Go save your empire, James. Sergeant and I will hold down the fort. Something in her voice made James's chest tighten. This matters to you. The company. No, Claire said softly. You matter, and your company matters to you, which means Sergeant and I want you to fight for it, just like you've been fighting for him. James didn't know what to say. I thank you. Go. We're fine. The next 3 days were a blur. James threw himself into the corporate battle with the same intensity he'd once brought to everything. He worked 18-hour days, took calls at midnight, negotiated and strategized, and executed with ruthless precision. But something was different this time. He called Claire 3 times a day for updates on Sargent. He left the office by 9 p.m. instead of staying until midnight. He found himself thinking about a 3-legged dog and an idealistic veterinarian more than quarterly projections. On the 4th day, James's phone rang at 2 a.m. Claire's voice was shaky. "James, I need you to come home, now." "What's wrong?" "Sargent had a severe panic attack. Something triggered him, I don't know what. He's been aggressive, snapping, and he won't let me near him." "I don't want to sedate him, but I might have to for safety. I'm coming, 20 minutes. James made it in 15, breaking every speed limit. He found Claire standing in the hallway outside the living room, stress evident in every line of her body. "Where is he?" "Corner, behind the couch. James, be careful." But James was already moving. He entered the living room slowly, talking in that low, steady voice he'd developed over weeks of night terrors. "Hey, Sergeant, it's me. I'm sorry I've been gone so much. That's on me, buddy, but I'm here now." Sargent was in the corner, lips pulled back in a snarl, eyes wild. But when he heard James's voice, something flickered. Recognition fought with panic. James sat down on the floor, making himself non-threatening. "I know you're scared. I know the world feels like it's ending. But you're not alone. Claire's here. I'm here. We're not going anywhere." He kept talking, kept providing that steady presence. Minutes ticked by. Gradually, so gradually, Claire held her breath. Sargent's snarling stopped. His breathing slowed. The wildness left his eyes. And then Sargent moved. Not toward James, but toward the space between James and where Claire had carefully sat down at the doorway. The dog positioned himself where he could see both of them, then collapsed in exhaustion. James and Claire didn't move. They sat like that for an hour, just being present, until Sargent finally fell into sleep. Only then did Claire move closer to James. "How did you do that?" "I just showed up," James said quietly. "Isn't that what you told me? That's all he needed." Claire's eyes were bright with emotion. "James, I was terrified. I've handled hundreds of trauma cases, and I was terrified, but you knew what to do." "I knew because you taught me," James said. "Every evening, every piece of advice, every demonstration of patience. You showed me how to see him, how to help him." They were sitting close now, shoulders touching. Claire's hand found his. "I was wrong about you," she whispered. "That first night I thought you were just another wealthy person playing hero. But you're not. You're real." James turned to face her. "Claire, I think I'm falling for you," she said in a rush, like she couldn't hold it in anymore. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't looking for it. But somewhere between teaching you about trauma response and watching you sleep on floors and sacrifice your schedule and fight the VA and just show up. Every single day, even when it was hard, I fell." James couldn't breathe. "I don't know how to be what you deserve." "I don't want what I deserve," Claire said, her hand coming up to touch his face. "I want what's real. And you, James Kensington, for all your billions and your walls and your fear, you're the realest person I've met in years." James couldn't keep running from the truth. The dog's healing was no longer just about a broken animal. It was about James confronting the darkness inside himself. But would he risk everything for the chance to heal, or would he remain trapped in his emotional cage? He kissed her. Gently at first, then deeper, as weeks of growing connection finally found expression. Claire kissed him back with equal intensity, her hand fisting in his shirt. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sargent raised his head and looked at them. The dog's tail wagged once, just once, but it was there. "I think he approves," Claire said, laughing through tears. "Claire, I don't know what I'm doing. With you. I'm going to mess up." "We both will," she said. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe perfect isn't the goal. Maybe showing up imperfectly is enough." James pulled her close, holding her like she might disappear. "I'm supposed to be in a board meeting in 4 hours. Are you going?" James looked at Sargent, peacefully sleeping, at Claire, warm and solid in his arms. At this accidental life he'd stumbled into when he stopped trying to control everything. "No," he said. "I'm going to delegate. I'm going to let my team handle it. And I'm going to stay here with the two beings who actually matter." Claire smiled against his chest. "Who are you? And what have you done with the workaholic CEO?" "He's learning," James said softly. "Finally learning what actually matters." They stayed like that until sunrise, keeping vigil over a sleeping war dog who had somehow saved them both. Sometimes the greatest battles are fought not in boardrooms, but in learning to let someone in. The Vertex takeover attempt failed. James's team, highly competent people he'd hired precisely because they were brilliant, handled it with skill. The board, while initially concerned about his absence, was reassured by James's strategic vision presented via video conference. The shareholders, swayed by the company's continued strong performance, rejected the hostile bid. James's empire was safe, and he'd barely been present for the fight. "This is what delegation looks like," Claire teased as they read the news together over breakfast. "It's terrifying," James admitted, "realizing I'm not as essential as I thought." "You're essential," Claire said, stealing a piece of his toast. "Just not in the way you thought. Sargent thinks you're essential. I think you're essential." James pulled her closer on the couch. Sargent, lying across both their laps, made a sound of contentment. It had been 6 weeks since the auction. 6 weeks that had transformed everything. Sargent's night terrors had decreased. He initiated contact now, seeking out James or Claire for attention. He played with toys. He ate regularly. The wildness in his eyes had been replaced by something calmer, safer. "The VA called," Claire said, tracing patterns on James's arm. "They approved your permanent adoption of Sargent. The paperwork is finalized." "Really?" James felt emotion swell in his chest. "Really, he's officially yours, though I think he'd argue he's ours." "Ours," James repeated, testing the word. "I like that." Claire shifted to look at him. "I've been offered a position, head of the VA's PTSD program for military working dogs. It's based in D.C. It's everything I've been working toward." James felt his heart stop. That's incredible. You should take it." "I haven't decided yet." "Claire, because I'm not sure I want to leave," she said. "I'm not sure I want to leave him." She looked at Sargent, then back at James. "Either of you." James couldn't find words. Claire cupped his face gently. "I think I love you," she said simply. "I think I've loved you since you called me at 2 a.m. in a panic, and I realized you were someone who'd show up for a promise, someone who'd fight for something that couldn't pay you back." "I definitely love you," James said, voice rough with emotion. "I didn't think I was capable of it anymore. But you made me capable. You and Sargent, you broke through everything I'd built." "So what do we do?" Claire asked. James thought about his company, about her career, about the life they'd accidentally built. "What if you took the position but we made it work? I can work remotely part-time. I can be in D.C. 2 weeks a month. We can figure it out." "You'd do that?" "Claire, 6 weeks ago, I was a man who owned everything and had nothing. Now I have a traumatized war dog who trusts me, and a woman I love, and an actual reason to come home. Yes, I'd do that. I'd do anything to keep this." Claire kissed him, and James felt like he was finally, actually alive. "Also," he said when they pulled apart, "I've been thinking about something. The VA program needs funding. My company has money. What if we created a foundation, specifically for military working dogs with PTSD? funding for treatment, placement, and long-term care. We could— Stop, Claire said, laughing. Stop being perfect. I'm not perfect. I'm just a man who finally figured out what matters. They spent the rest of the morning planning. A foundation, Claire's new position, their bi-coastal life, Sargent's continued treatment. All the complicated logistics of merging two lives that had been separate for so long. And through it all, Sargent watched them with those intelligent eyes that had seen so much pain. Eyes that were finally, gradually, learning to reflect something else. Hope. 6 months later, the Kensington Foundation for Military Working Dogs opened on a crisp morning in Washington, D.C. James stood at the podium, Claire beside him, Sargent sitting calmly at their feet. The dog had become the unofficial mascot of the foundation. 6 months ago, James told the assembled crowd of veterans, advocates, and press, I made an impulsive decision at a charity auction. I bid $10,000 on a dog I wasn't prepared to handle. It was reckless. It was foolish. He looked down at Sargent, who looked back with complete trust. It was the best decision I've ever made. The crowd applauded. James continued, This foundation exists because I learned something important. Trauma isn't something you fix with money, but money can provide the time, the space, the resources for healing to happen. It can connect damaged warriors with patient people willing to do the work. He gestured to Claire, who squeezed his hand. Dr. Claire Thompson leads our clinical team. She's pioneering new treatment protocols. She's training the next generation of behavioral specialists. And she's proving that with proper care, dogs like Sargent can not only survive their trauma, they can thrive. More applause. James felt his chest tighten with pride. After the ceremony, as they walked through the new facility, state-of-the-art treatment rooms, spacious recovery areas, staff trained in trauma-informed care, Claire pulled him aside. I'm proud of you, she said. Look what you built. We built, James corrected. None of this happens without you. None of this happens without a broken dog and a broken man finding each other, Claire said softly. James pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. Are we still broken? Maybe, Claire admitted. But we're broken together. That's different. Sargent barked once, as if in agreement. That evening, in their new home, a compromise between James's minimalist aesthetic and Claire's comfortable warmth, they sat on the couch. Sargent sprawled across both their laps, snoring softly. Do you ever regret it? James asked quietly. That night I called you? The first time when you thought I was just another wealthy idiot? Claire smiled. Every day. Really? No. She kissed him softly. Not even for a second. You changed my life, James Kensington. You saved mine, James countered. We saved each other, Claire said. And we saved him. They looked at Sargent, this warrior who had survived war and loss and abandonment, who had taught them both what courage really looked like. Thank you for taking a chance on me, James said. On us. Thank you for showing up, Claire replied, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. James looked around at their life, messy, imperfect, real. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, hollow and successful and utterly alone. Then he thought about who he was now, still learning, still healing, still sometimes terrified of screwing it all up, but present, actually living instead of just existing. You know what the craziest part is? James said. What? I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy. I didn't even know what that felt like until now. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. Me too. Sargent shifted in his sleep, paws twitching as he dreamed. Not nightmares this time. Just dreams. The healing kind. And James realized that's all any of them needed. Not perfection, not a cure, just the space to heal, and people willing to witness that healing without requiring it to look any particular way. "I love you," he whispered to Claire. "I love you too," she whispered back. And in the morning, they'd do it all again. Show up. Be present. Choose each other and this accidental family they'd built. It wasn't the life James had planned. It was infinitely better. Thank you for joining James, Claire, and Sargent on this transformative journey. Sometimes the moments that change us most come from the unlikeliest places. A chance encounter at an auction, an impulsive decision that makes no logical sense, the willingness to open our hearts when we've spent years keeping them locked away. Have you ever experienced a moment that unexpectedly changed your life? Do you believe in second chances? For ourselves, for others, for the souls who enter our lives when we need them most? This is just the beginning of James and Claire's story. The foundation they built continues to save military working dogs every single day. Sargent became an ambassador for trauma recovery, proving that healing is possible even in the most broken warriors. And two people who thought they were too damaged to love learned that sometimes being broken together is exactly what makes us whole. If this story touched you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about love, redemption, and the unexpected ways we find healing. Hit that notification bell so you'll never miss a new chapter. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, that it's never too late to change, to heal, to let love in, share this story with them. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is take a chance on hope, just like James did that night at the auction, just like Sargent did when he decided to trust again, just like we all can whenever we're ready. What's your story of unexpected transformation? Have you ever taken a chance that changed everything? We'd love to hear it in the comments below. Until next time, remember, you're never too broken to begin again. And sometimes, the most impulsive decisions lead to the most beautiful destinations. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.